The boardroom felt like a courtroom that morning. I stood at the head of the glass table, my folder in hand, facing 12 board members, and at the far end, my father, Richard Vance, CEO of Vance Group. I had spent 4 months on that proposal. 4 months of late nights and sacrifices, all for one chance to prove I belonged here. The moment I clicked to my third slide, the room went cold. The numbers on the screen were completely wrong. Not slightly off, completely wrong. Figures I had never written, projections I had never made. I had no explanation and no words. "This is unacceptable," my father said, rising slowly. His voice was low and controlled, which was worse than shouting. "Remove her." 2 security guards stepped into the doorway. I looked at my father one last time, searching for any trace of doubt on his face. There was none. I walked out. As the heavy door swung shut behind me, his voice carried clearly through the narrowing gap. "She was never capable." The words landed like something physical. I pressed my back against the cold hallway wall and forced myself to breathe. Then I heard it, a whisper slipping through the last inch of the closing door. That wasn't her real proposal. I stopped breathing entirely. I sat in my car for 20 minutes after they walked me out. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I wasn't going anywhere. I kept thinking about those wrong numbers. Figures I had never typed, never approved, never seen before that morning. Picked up my phone. 3 missed calls from IT. I tried my work email. Access denied. I tried the internal dashboard. Locked out. I pulled up the staff portal. My profile was already gone. I stared at the screen in disbelief. All of this had happened within the hour. Within minutes of being removed from that boardroom, every digital door connected to my position had been shut. You don't lock someone out of a system that quickly by accident. You don't deactivate a corporate ID in real time unless someone prepared for this in advance. I drove slowly out of the parking garage, working through the timeline in my head. The altered slides. The instant lockout. The guards already positioned at the door before my father finished his sentence. This wasn't a reaction to a bad presentation. This had been arranged, carefully, deliberately, by someone who knew exactly what was going to happen in that room and had made absolutely sure I couldn't fight back. Question was who, and how far back the planning actually went. I drove to the apartment my father had arranged for me when I joined Vance Group 2 years earlier. It was a company benefit listed in my employment contract. I had always known it was tied to the job. I just hadn't expected to lose both on the same morning. I turned my key in the lock. It didn't move. I tried again. Nothing. I stepped back and stared at the door. Then I noticed my belongings lined up against the wall. 2 suitcases, a cardboard box, a bag of shoes. Someone had packed my things. Someone had been inside my home while I sat in that boardroom being publicly humiliated. There was an envelope taped to the top suitcase. Inside was a single typed sheet, signed by my father. "You need to grow up," without my name. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my coat pocket. I didn't cry. Not there. Not where anyone could see. I picked up my bags and walked to the elevator, telling myself what I always had when things fell apart. Start again. But this time something inside me had shifted. Not bitterness, something harder and quieter. Whatever came next, I was going to build it entirely myself. I stayed in a cheap hotel for the first 3 nights. On the second evening, I opened my laptop and pulled up the original version of my proposal, the copy saved to my personal hard drive before I submitted it to the company server. I read through it slowly, slide by slide. Then I opened the photographs I had taken on my phone that morning, screen captures of what appeared on the boardroom projector before the guards reached me. I compared both versions carefully, side by side. The structure was identical. The language matched. Even the formatting was the same. Same fonts, same layout, same section headers. But every financial figure had been replaced. Every projection, every cost estimate, every growth calculation had been swapped for numbers that made the proposal look reckless and carelessly researched. Whoever did this understood my work well enough to copy its shape while gutting its substance. That meant it wasn't a stranger. The alterations were precise. The kind of edit that required time, access, and a thorough understanding of what I had been arguing. Someone had studied my real proposal closely, and redesigned it specifically to make me look incompetent in front of the people whose opinions mattered most. The question burning through me was simple. Who had access to my files? I spent the following week making quiet phone calls. I still had personal numbers for a few long-standing Vance Group employees, people who had known me before my father gave me a formal role and had treated me with genuine warmth. One was Mr. Francis, a senior operations manager who had worked at Vance Group for nearly 2 decades. He agreed to meet me at a small cafe far from the office. He looked uncomfortable from the moment he sat down and kept glancing at the door. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," I told him. "But I need to understand what happened." He stirred his coffee without drinking it. Then he looked at me directly. "The version the board saw wasn't your file," he said quietly. "It was uploaded to the system the night before, from a different account. The board never saw what you actually prepared." My chest tightened. "Whose account?" He hesitated. Then he said the name I had already begun to fear. "Derek. My half-brother." Mr. Francis nodded slowly. "He presented it himself and told the board he was submitting it on your behalf." I thanked him and walked out into the cold. The sabotage hadn't been accidental. It had been carefully authored, by someone who shared my own bloodline. That evening, I sat on the hotel bed with a notebook and wrote down everything I could remember. Every moment over the past 2 years where something had gone unexpectedly wrong. Presentation cancelled without explanation. A meeting I was removed from at the last minute. A project reassigned to Derek just before it delivered results. I had blamed bad timing. I had blamed misunderstandings. I had blamed myself. Now I saw the pattern clearly. My stepmother, Pamela, had never tried hard to hide her dislike of me. She had married my father 8 years ago, 2 years after my mother passed. From the beginning, she had worked to make herself indispensable, managing his schedule, filtering his conversations, deciding who deserved his time. I had assumed her coldness was personal. I hadn't understood it was also strategic. Pamela had spent years placing quiet doubts in my father's mind. Small comments after meetings. Gentle suggestions that I wasn't quite ready. Observations about my judgment and reliability. She never attacked me directly. She was too calculated for that. And my father, who prided himself on sharp instincts, had absorbed every word. He hadn't discarded me in that boardroom because he saw the truth. He had discarded me because he had been slowly, patiently taught what to believe. That didn't make it hurt less. It made it heavier. 3 weeks after the boardroom, I stopped waiting for anyone to contact me. My father didn't reach out. Derek certainly didn't. Even colleagues I had considered friends went silent, which told me everything about the story being circulated inside Vance Group. I couldn't afford to stay still. I had savings, enough for a few months, and I had real skills. But I had a name working against me. Everyone in my professional circle knew who my father was. Being a Vance right now meant being the daughter who had failed publicly. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted work. So I took a job at a logistics warehouse on the far side of the city. I applied using my middle name, Victoria K. No one asked questions. I was hired to manage inventory coordination and started the following Monday. The work was repetitive and physical, but I paid close attention. On my 3rd day, 2 workers on the loading dock were complaining about a supplier. One mentioned Vance Group by name. "That company's been a mess for months," he said, stacking crates with a grunt. "Late deliveries, missed orders. Something's gone wrong at the top." I said nothing and kept counting boxes. But inside I was listening with everything I had, filing every word somewhere useful, building a picture one small piece at a time. 3 months into the warehouse job, I understood operations in a way no boardroom had ever taught me. I watched how inventory actually moved. I tracked where delays genuinely happened. I mapped the gap between what managers reported upward and what workers dealt with every single day on the ground. Vance Group had always been my father's company in theory. I now understood how little either of us had grasped about what happened at ground level. My father managed from the top floor. I had been trained to do the same. But the real story of any business lived in its supply chain, its delivery schedules, its daily friction. I started keeping a personal journal. Every observation, every inefficiency I noticed, every small fix that could prevent a larger breakdown. In my 4th month, I spotted a recurring bottleneck in the weekend delivery schedule. The routing system was assigning drivers by vehicle size instead of travel distance, causing unnecessary fuel costs and consistent late arrivals. I typed up a quiet suggestion and left it unsigned in the operations manager's inbox. The following week, the schedule was restructured. Results improved immediately. No one knew it was me. No one needed to. I was beginning to understand something important. That the most effective influence often operated without a name attached to it at all. My anonymous suggestion caught the attention of my direct supervisor, Frank. He didn't know I had written it, but I watched him study the results carefully. Within days, he was bringing questions to my station. Not because he suspected anything, simply because I always seemed to know the answer. He began relying on my judgment without fully recognizing it. When supplier issues came up, he asked my opinion. When scheduling conflicts arose, he walked to my section first. He presented my ideas in team meetings as his own, which bothered me far less than it once might have. I was learning something worth more than credit. I was learning how real influence moved without a title behind it. One evening I stayed late to help reorganize the warehouse database. While cross-referencing delivery records, I noticed something. A pattern of consistent overpayments to a single supplier, a company name I didn't recognize. The individual amounts were small, but across 12 months, the total was significant. I noted the supplier's name in my journal and kept working. Meanwhile, every evening after the warehouse closed, I took online courses: corporate finance, acquisitions law, turnaround strategy. I spent weekends in the library. I wasn't recovering from what had happened to me. I was preparing for what I intended to do about it. 6 months after the boardroom, I saw the photographs by accident. A financial news article had appeared in a general search, and I clicked it without thinking. My father stood at the center of the image, wearing the charcoal suit he reserved for significant announcements. Derek stood beside him with one hand on his shoulder, looking polished and completely relaxed. The caption read, "Vance Group announces leadership transition. Derek Vance named Deputy CEO." I stared at the screen without moving. I had grown up watching my father build Vance Group from a small trading firm into a mid-sized company worth tens of millions. I had watched him sacrifice dinners, holidays, and relationships for that business. And now he was handing it, piece by piece, to someone who had engineered my collapse to clear the path. I thought back to what Mr. Francis had told me. Derek had uploaded an altered version of my proposal and presented it as though acting on my behalf. He had positioned himself as responsible and reliable while making sure I looked incompetent. He hadn't just stolen my opportunity. He had been planning to from long before that morning. The boardroom wasn't the start of it. It was only the day I finally understood what had been happening all along. 7 months in, the financial news surrounding Vance Group became harder to ignore. Reports appeared in business publications, cautious at first, then increasingly pointed. Revenue was falling. 2 major clients had moved to competitors. The Western Division was recording its worst quarter in a decade. But I suspected the damage went deeper than poor management. I went back to the supplier entry I had flagged months earlier in my journal. I researched it properly during my evenings. Public business registries, corporate filings, careful cross-referencing. The supplier company had been registered 18 months ago. The listed director was a name I didn't recognize. But the registered address matched an apartment building where Pamela had lived before she married my father. I read that line 3 times. I checked the address again. It was exact. The pieces assembled with a clarity that turned my stomach. Vance Group's losses weren't simply the result of weak leadership. Money was moving out of the company through invoices for services never provided, and the trail led directly back to my stepmother. I documented everything in careful detail. Dates, payment amounts, registration numbers, addresses, timelines. I wasn't certain exactly how I was going to use it all, but I knew without any doubt that every piece needed to be accounted for and secure. 8 months after the boardroom, something inside me shifted. It happened quietly, without any dramatic moment to mark it. I was walking home from the library one evening when I realized I had spent the entire day without once imagining what my father would think of what I was doing. I hadn't rehearsed a conversation with him, hadn't measured my progress against his reaction. For as long as I could remember, I had built my ambitions around his opinion of me. Every achievement had been aimed, at least partly, at making him see me differently. Even the proposal I had spent 4 months building, I had framed it inside my head as the thing that would finally change how he looked at me. I stopped in the middle of the pavement and let that thought fully arrive. He was never going to see me the way I needed him to. Not because I wasn't capable, but because he had been carefully shaped to see something else entirely. Wanting his approval had always been the trap. Releasing it was the only real exit. I made a decision right there, under a streetlight, surrounded by strangers. I was finished seeking validation from anyone. I had a new goal now. Not recognition, not reconciliation, ownership, and I was going to pursue it with everything I had built. The years that followed were the quietest and most productive of my life. I left the warehouse after 14 months, having learned everything it could teach me. By then I had saved enough to accept a part-time consultancy role with a small investment firm. I didn't use my full last name at first. I let the quality of my work speak instead. Spoke clearly. Within a year, I had identified 3 struggling businesses with recoverable foundations. The firm backed my analysis on all 3. Each one stabilized and grew. My reputation, understated and carefully built, began attracting attention in the right circles. In my 4th year I started investing my own money. Cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as my instincts sharpened through real experience. I studied acquisition strategy, corporate restructuring, and distressed asset recovery with the same intensity one had once given to seeking my father's approval. I also kept my Vance Group research current. I tracked their financial filings. I monitored the supplier payments. I noted new irregularities as they appeared and added them to my file. By my 5th year I had built a meaningful portfolio, a trusted network of lawyers and analysts, and a reputation built entirely on my own work. I was no longer the daughter trying to prove something. I was becoming someone new entirely. The news broke on a Thursday morning. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a financial alert. The headline read, "Vance Group founder steps down amid board pressure." I set my coffee down slowly. My father had been removed as CEO following a vote of no confidence. The official statement cited strategic disagreements and performance concerns. A second article, published 2 hours later, was more direct. 3 major investors had demanded leadership change after 18 consecutive months of revenue decline. Derek was named acting CEO. I read both pieces twice, then sat quietly for a moment. I thought about my father. Not with satisfaction, not with sympathy, but with a strange and distant sadness. He had built something genuinely real over decades. And he had handed it to 2 people who were quietly draining it from the inside. The financial reports made it plain. Vance Group was declining in ways no market conditions could fully explain. The supplier payments, the inflated operating costs, the management decisions that seemed designed to weaken rather than grow. They had gotten exactly what they wanted. The company was theirs. But they hadn't understood something essential. A company being drained from within doesn't stay yours for long. The collapse was only going to move faster now. 3 months after my father's removal, I made my first real move. It was deliberate, careful, and invisible to anyone watching from outside. Working alongside a corporate lawyer I had built a trusted relationship with over 2 years, I structured a series of small share purchases in Vance Group through 3 separate investment vehicles, none directly linked to my name in any public record. The purchases were spread across several weeks. Individual amounts stayed below disclosure thresholds, but they were adding up steadily. Vance Group's share price had been falling for over a year. Most serious investors were staying away. The company's reputation was damaged, client relationships were strained, and its leadership was drawing quiet concern from anyone who could read a balance sheet. To me, it looked exactly like what it was: a recoverable company in the wrong hands. Fix the leadership. Stop the financial bleeding. Restore key client relationships. The infrastructure, the workforce, the core contracts, they were all still there, still viable. I began constructing a full acquisition plan. Not a rough outline. A complete, properly researched document with financial modeling, legal structure, and an operational transition timeline detailed enough to withstand serious scrutiny. Every evening after everyone else had gone home, I sat at my desk and built it, number by number, section by section, until every part was airtight. I was inside the system now. Quietly, patiently, and nobody had any idea. I ran into my father completely by chance outside a coffee shop on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I turned a corner and there he was, standing with a paper cup, looking at his phone. He had aged in ways I hadn't expected. His shoulders carried a new heaviness. The confident posture that had defined him for as long as I could remember had softened into something more careful. His suit was still neat, but the man wearing it seemed smaller than the one who had dismissed me without hesitation 5 years ago. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. Neither of us moved. "Victoria," he said. "Dad," I replied. We stood on the pavement with nothing comfortable to say. He looked down at his cup. "I've been thinking about decisions I made," he said. "I trusted the wrong people." I looked at him carefully. He meant it. He simply didn't know yet exactly how wrong, or exactly how close to the full truth he was standing at that very moment. "I hope things improve for you," I said. He nodded once. "You too, Victoria." We parted. He walked one way. I walked the other. He had no idea that the person already rising, already moving quietly and deliberately toward something he couldn't yet see, was me. 2 months after that pavement encounter, I had everything I needed. The evidence file had been assembled carefully over years: registration documents, payment records, bank transfer trails obtained through proper legal channels, and written statements from 2 former Vance Group employees who had noticed financial irregularities and been quietly removed before they could raise formal questions. The supplier scheme was fully mapped. A company registered using an address connected to Pamela had been billing Vance Group for services never delivered. Derek, as deputy and then acting CEO, had personally approved every payment. The total diverted across 3 years accounted for a significant portion of the company's reported losses. They hadn't just pushed me out. They had used my removal to clear the path. With me gone and no one asking difficult questions, they had turned Vance Group into a private income source. The board was managed through carefully edited reports. External auditors received clean versions of the accounts. But paper trails don't vanish because someone is careful. They compress. They wait. I now had the complete picture, thoroughly documented and reviewed by my legal team. I had the power to bring the entire structure down. But I wasn't going to act out of anger. Anger makes mistakes. I was going to act at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, with every piece perfectly in position. The moment arrived 6 weeks later, when Vance Group's deteriorating condition became visible enough that outside investors began circling. A company with real assets and a collapsing share price attracts attention, not always from people who intend to save it. 2 acquisition offers were submitted to the board within the same week. Both came from firms planning to strip valuable assets and exit quickly. Neither included a plan for the workforce, the existing client contracts, or any long-term recovery. The board was divided. Some wanted a fast resolution. Others worried about legal exposure and what a rushed sale would mean for the company's remaining reputation. I submitted my offer quietly, through my holding company. No press statement. Just a formally structured proposal delivered directly to the board's legal counsel. The offer was financially competitive. More importantly, it was responsible. My lawyers had prepared a complete operational recovery plan, client restoration, leadership transition, financial restructuring, and a clear 18-month path back to sustainable profitability. This was not a stripping operation. It was a genuine rescue with real detail behind every number. The board requested a private meeting within 48 hours. Derek found out before the meeting. I expected that. He applied pressure to 2 board members he had relationships with, attempting to block the discussion. But there were 10 members on that board. And 8 of them had watched the company deteriorate steadily under his leadership for more than a year. The board meeting lasted 4 hours. My lawyers and financial advisors were in the room. My documents were on the table. My numbers had been independently verified and were entirely clean. What I learned afterward from my legal counsel was that the discussion had been heated. Derek argued against my offer without knowing it was mine. He called it opportunistic, questioned the credibility of the holding company behind it, and pushed hard for one of the asset stripping offers instead, which, reviewed carefully, told the remaining board members exactly where his personal interests sat. The company's financial situation was no longer theoretical. Debt payments were overdue. A key client had formally ended their contract. The operating account was under serious strain. By the end of the 4th hour, the vote was taken. My offer was accepted. The legal transfer would take several weeks. Share assignments, regulatory filings, contract transitions, all the quiet machinery of a properly structured acquisition. But the decision had been made and formally recorded. Control of Vance Group was shifting. And it was shifting to me. I sat alone in my car outside my lawyer's office that evening, in the dark and the quiet, and allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time in years. Not triumph. Something steadier and more permanent. The calm of a person who had done every part of the work. I requested a full board meeting for the week after the legal transfer was finalized. I communicated only that the new ownership wished to address the board in person. No further details. I arrived 10 minutes early. I wore a dark suit purchased specifically for that morning. My documents were in a slim folder. My lawyers were beside me. I had slept well. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered it. Same long glass table. Same 12 chairs. Same view of the city skyline through the tall windows. The last time I stood in this room, security guards had walked me out while my father's words followed me through the door. Board members filed in, some curious, some visibly cautious. Derek entered last, his expression tight. He still had not been told who was behind the acquisition. I had made certain of that through my legal team. He sat down and looked at the lawyers across the table. His eyes passed over me without recognition. A stranger in a suit, he assumed. Someone representing a nameless holding company. I waited until every chair was filled and the room had fully settled. Then I opened my folder, looked up steadily, and introduced myself. My name is Victoria Vance. As of this week, I am the principal owner of Vance Group. The silence that followed was total and absolute. The silence lasted 5 seconds. Then the room erupted. Derek was on his feet before anyone else moved. His face had gone a deep, unpleasant red. "This is not possible," he said, his voice climbing fast. "The acquisition was structured through a holding company. There's no legal basis." "The holding company is mine," I said. "Fully documented. Review the filing." My lawyer placed a bound copy of the complete ownership transfer in front of each board member without a word. Derek stared at the documents. He looked at me. He looked at the documents again. "I'll challenge this," he said. "You're welcome to try," I replied. I glanced at my legal team. They prepared for exactly that. The board's own legal counsel had already reviewed and validated every step of the acquisition. There was no procedural error, no gap, no opening Derek could use. He had tried to block the offer before it was formally considered and had failed. Challenging it now would require alleging fraud, which would mean opening his own financial records. He sat back down slowly. The remaining board members were quiet. Several were looking at me with something I had not encountered in this room before. Genuine respect. I didn't need it, but I noted it. I set my folder flat on the table and moved directly to the next item on the agenda. I had saved the financial evidence for last. Not for effect, because sequencing matters. I needed every board member to fully understand the new ownership structure before showing them what had been happening beneath their oversight for 3 years. My lawyer distributed the second set of documents, organized with deliberate clarity. Transaction records, supplier registration details, payment approval signatures, a complete timeline of funds leaving the company through falsified invoices. I walked the board through it in plain, specific language. No speeches, no emotional framing. Just a precise account of what the documents demonstrated, in the order events had occurred. The supplier company, the registration address linked to Pamela, the invoices submitted for services never performed, Derek's personal approval signatures on every payment, the cumulative total transferred, the direct effect on the company's operating accounts, quarter by quarter. Halfway through, a senior board member turned to Derek and asked whether he wished to respond. Derek said nothing. He was staring at the table in front of him. Pamela had never formally held a position at Vance Group, which had made her involvement easy to conceal, and now that everything was documented, completely impossible to defend. Finished. I closed my folder and looked at the room. I've already filed the relevant reports with the appropriate authorities, I said. I'll leave the next steps to them. Security was called to the building that afternoon. Not for me. Derek was escorted out before the close of business that day. By evening, the board had voted to strip him of every remaining position at Vance Group. His access was revoked. His credentials collected at reception. The same quiet institutional machinery that had been used to erase me 5 years earlier was now running efficiently in the opposite direction. Pamela received legal documentation 2 days later. Her lawyers issued a brief statement expressing willingness to cooperate with investigators. Everyone familiar with the situation understood that to mean the opposite. My father learned what had happened through a call from one of the board members. I hadn't told him myself. I wanted the facts to reach him without my framing attached. He called me that evening. I let it ring. He called again the following morning. I let that ring too. On the third day I answered. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice carried nothing I had ever heard from him. No authority, no performance, nothing rehearsed. "Victoria," he said quietly. I didn't know. I believed him. That was the part that was hardest to sit with. He had been manipulated as deliberately as I had. He had simply not paid the same price. He asked if he could come and see me. I told him I would think about it. We met 3 weeks later at a small restaurant near my office. I arrived first. When my father walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. He had lost weight. His hair had gone almost completely gray. He moved slowly and carefully, like someone being deliberate about the space he occupied. He sat across from me and placed his hands flat on the table. He didn't look away. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for the boardroom, for all of it. For the years before it. I was told things about your judgment, your readiness, your character. And I believed them because it was easier than looking closely. I was a poor father long before that meeting took place." His voice broke on the final sentence. He didn't rush to recover it. I sat with the apology for a full moment. I didn't dismiss it. I didn't rush past it to make him more comfortable. But I also didn't offer comfort he hadn't fully earned yet. "I heard you," I said. Then I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a job offer. Entry level. Operations coordinator, reporting to my general manager. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. "Earn it," I said. "The same way I had to." He picked up the paper, read every line, and nodded once, quietly without argument. The power between us had shifted completely. We both understood that. 8 months later, I stood at the window of my corner office on the 14th floor of the Vance Group building, my building now, and watched the city ease into early evening. The Western Division had been fully restructured. 3 major clients had returned. Revenue was up for the second consecutive quarter. The staff moved through the hallways with a steadiness they hadn't carried in years, like people who finally trusted the direction they were being led. My father worked 2 floors below me. He had accepted the position without complaint and, from every account that reached me, was doing the work with genuine effort and quiet consistency. He didn't seek me out at the office. He didn't attempt to renegotiate his role or lean on our shared name. He came in each morning, did what was asked, and left in the evening. I didn't need him to become a different person. I only needed him to be an honest one now. He was managing that, slowly and without fanfare. I had no interest in revenge. I never truly had. Revenge would have required keeping my father permanently at the center of my story. And he hadn't been the center of my story for a very long time. I turned from the window and sat at my desk. The proposal I had prepared 5 years ago, the one stolen, altered, and used against me in this very building, I had finally submitted it properly. To my own board, with my name clearly on every page. They approved it unanimously. He called me a failure, so I became the one who rewrote his ending.